The September sun bore down on Redemption Valley like the wrath of God himself, turning the Texas dirt to dust and the air to something you could almost chew. The stagecoach rattled to a stop outside Tucker's General Store, its wheels leaving twin scars in the parched earth. The driver, a weathered man named Hayes, who had seen enough misery to fill 3 lifetimes, climbed down with unusual care. "You sure about this, ma'am?" he asked, his voice rough as sandpaper. "I could take you further west. No charge." The woman who emerged from the coach didn't answer right away. She was small, maybe 5'4", wearing a black dress that had once been fine but was now dusty and torn at the hem. Her hair, dark as a raven's wing, had come loose from its pins. Her face bore the unmistakable marks of hardship, lips cracked from days without proper water, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights, and a pallor that spoke of hunger. Clara May Hartley stood on Texas soil for the first time in her 27 years and felt nothing but emptiness. "I have nowhere else to go," she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the hot wind. Hayes studied her with the practiced eye of a man who had transported countless souls across this unforgiving land. He had picked her up 3 days ago in Fort Worth, where she had arrived on the eastbound train with a single carpetbag and eyes that looked like they had seen the devil himself. "You got people here?" he pressed gently. Clara reached into the small purse at her waist and pulled out a folded letter, yellowed at the edges from being read too many times. "I have this." Hayes didn't need to read it. He had seen enough mail-order bride arrangements to know heartbreak when he saw it. "Well then," he said, lifting her single bag from the coach, "welcome to Redemption Valley." The town gathered around them like vultures circling carrion. It was Saturday, which meant the weekly cattle auction had just ended, and the saloons were beginning to fill. Cowboys and ranchers, shopkeepers, and their wives all stopped to stare at the woman in black, who had arrived with nothing but a worn carpetbag and the weight of some unseen sorrow. Clara felt their eyes on her like brands. She had known this moment would come, had prepared herself for it during the long journey from Virginia, but preparation and reality were 2 different beasts entirely. "Well now," a voice drawled from the boardwalk, "looks like someone's had themselves a rough journey." The speaker was a tall man, maybe 40, dressed too fine for honest work. His vest was silk, his hat beaver felt, and his smile had all the warmth of a snake sizing up a mouse. 2 men flanked him, their hands resting casual on gun belts, their eyes hard. "Name's Jack Donovan," the man continued, tipping his hat in a mockery of politeness. "I own the Double D Ranch north of here. You look like you could use a hot meal and a place to rest. My ranch house has plenty of room for a lady in need." The way he said "lady" made Clara's skin crawl. She had met men like Jack Donovan before. Her late husband Silas had been one of them, all charm on the surface and rot underneath. "The lady's not interested," a new voice cut through the afternoon heat. The crowd parted, and Clara saw him for the first time. Wyatt Kincaid stood perhaps 6'2", lean but solid, with the kind of quiet presence that made other men step aside without quite knowing why. He wore worn denim and a blue work shirt faded from years of sun and sweat. A black Stetson sat low on his head, casting his face in shadow, but Clara could see the scar that ran from his temple to his jaw on the left side. A Colt .45 rested on his hip, the holster worn smooth from use. His eyes, she noticed, were the color of winter storm clouds. "Don't recall asking your opinion, Kincaid," Jack said, his smile tightening. "Don't recall needing your permission to give it," Wyatt replied evenly. His gaze never left Jack's face, but Clara felt him taking in everything, her injuries, her exhaustion, the way she held herself like someone expecting the next blow. Jack's hand drifted toward his pearl-handled revolver. "The lady looks like she could use employment. I pay well for the right kind of help." The emphasis on help left no doubt what kind of work he had in mind. Wyatt's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the air. The casual observers on the boardwalk suddenly found reasons to step back. Even the horses seemed to sense the danger. Miss Hartley is expected, Wyatt said quietly. She's not looking for your kind of employment. Clara's breath caught. He knew her name, which meant he was the one she had come to find. But the letter had said he would meet her at the coach. The letter had said many things, she realized now, that appeared to be lies. That's so. Jack looked between them, calculation in his eyes. Funny, because I heard you changed your mind about that particular arrangement, Kincaid. Heard you sent a telegram declining the lady's services, something about not needing a wife after all. The words hit Clara like a physical blow. She had traveled 1,700 miles based on letters that had seemed kind, even gentle. Letters from a widower raising a young son alone, looking for help and companionship. Letters that had offered hope when she had none left. And he had changed his mind. The humiliation burned hotter than the Texas sun. She wanted to sink into the earth, to disappear, to be anywhere but here, with all these strangers watching her shame. But Clara May Hartley had not survived 4 months of hell, and a journey halfway across the country to crumble now. She lifted her chin and met Wyatt Kincaid's eyes directly. "Is that true?" she asked, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "Did you change your mind?" For a long moment, Wyatt said nothing. Then he removed his hat, and Clara saw his face fully for the first time. It was a hard face, weathered by sun and wind, and something deeper than physical hardship. But his eyes, those storm-gray eyes, held an ocean of pain. "Yes, ma'am," he said quietly. "I did. And I apologize for not sending word sooner. That was wrong of me." The apology, so simple and direct, somehow made it worse. Clara felt something inside her crack, some last fragile hope she had been carrying without realizing it. "I see," she managed. "Then I appear to have made this journey for nothing." "Not nothing," a woman's voice interjected. An older woman, perhaps 50, with gray-streaked hair and kind eyes, pushed through the crowd. "Elsie Tucker," she introduced herself. "I run the general store, and I've been looking for someone to help with the bookkeeping. The pay isn't much, but it comes with a room upstairs and 3 meals a day, if you're interested." Clara turned to her potential savior. Elsie Tucker wore a simple calico dress and a practical apron, and her face bore the marks of a woman who had worked hard her entire life. But her eyes were warm, and her offer was genuine. "I can keep books," Clara said. "My father owned a large farm in Virginia. I managed his accounts for 5 years before he passed." "That's more qualification than most folks in this town," Elsie said with a smile. "Come on inside. Let's get you out of this heat." As Clara moved toward the general store, she felt Wyatt Kincaid's eyes on her. She refused to look back. She had learned long ago that looking back only invited more pain. Inside the store, the temperature dropped a blessed 10 degrees. Elsie led her through aisles stocked with everything from flour to farming equipment, past the main counter, where a young clerk watched with undisguised curiosity, and up a narrow staircase to a small room under the eaves. It was sparse. A narrow bed, a washstand, a small table and chair. A window overlooked Main Street, currently filled with the dispersing crowd. But it was clean, and it was private, and after 4 months of sleeping in fear, those 2 things meant more than luxury ever could. "The pay is $2 a week," Elsie said, watching Clara's face. "That includes the room and meals. It's not much, but it's honest work." "It's more than generous," Clara replied. She reached into her purse and pulled out the coins she had left. 29 cents, everything she had in the world. "I should tell you," she continued, meeting Elsie's eyes, "I left Virginia under difficult circumstances. My husband died 4 months ago. His family blamed me for his death. They took everything, the house, the land, every penny. I have nothing but what you see." Elsie studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Your husband, was he a good man?" Clara's laugh was bitter as old coffee. "He was a drunk and a bully. He died falling off his horse coming home from the saloon. But his family had money and position, so the fault had to lie somewhere. I was convenient." Then they did you a favor running you off, Elsie said bluntly. Fresh start is worth more than inherited misery. You can begin tomorrow. For tonight, just rest. You look like you could use it. After Elsie left, Clara sat on the bed and finally allowed herself to feel the full weight of the day. She had traveled so far based on letters from a stranger, and that stranger had rejected her before they even met. She should feel devastated. Instead, she felt only a distant numbness, as if all her capacity for strong emotion had been used up somewhere between Virginia and Texas. She pulled out Wyatt Kincaid's letters, 5 of them in total, each written in a careful, deliberate hand. They spoke of a ranch, of a young son who needed a mother's care, of the loneliness of the frontier, and the hope that maybe 2 people could build something together from the ruins of their separate losses. They had seemed so genuine. Clara took the letters to the window, intending to throw them into the street. But something made her pause. She read them again, more slowly this time, looking for the lies she must have missed, but she found none. The letters spoke of honest need and careful hope. Whatever had changed Wyatt Kincaid's mind had happened after these were written. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. When she opened it, she found a boy standing there, perhaps 8 years old, wearing clothes that were clean but worn. He had his father's storm-gray eyes. "My name is Billy Kincaid," he said with the solemn formality of a child mimicking adult manners. "My pa sent me to apologize proper. He said what he'd done wasn't right, leaving you stranded like that." Clara looked at this small boy with his serious face and felt her heart contract. "Your father already apologized," she said gently, "but I appreciate you coming." Billy shifted from foot to foot, clearly having more to say, but unsure how to say it. Finally he blurted out, "Are you really not going to be my new ma?" The question, so direct and full of childish hope, nearly broke her. "I'm afraid not," Clara said, kneeling down to be at his eye level. "Your father changed his mind." "I know," Billy said, his voice small. "He always changes his mind about that kind of thing, but I thought maybe you'd be different. Your letters sounded nice." "You read my letters?" "Pa read them to me. He can't read too good himself, so Miss Elsie usually helps him, but he wanted me to hear what kind of lady was coming." This revelation painted a different picture of Wyatt Kincaid. A man who couldn't read well, but took the time to share letters with his son. A man who valued his child's opinion. "I'm going to be working for Miss Elsie," Clara told Billy. "So I'll be in town. Maybe I'll see you sometimes." Billy's face brightened considerably. "Really? Pa brings me to town every Saturday for the cattle auction, and sometimes during the week for supplies." "Then I'm sure we'll cross paths," Clara promised. After Billy left, Clara felt something shift inside her. The numbness began to crack, and underneath it was not the devastation she expected, but something else. Something that felt almost like relief. She had not wanted to marry Wyatt Kincaid, she realized. She had wanted to escape Virginia, to find somewhere she could rebuild without the shadow of Silas Creed hanging over her. The marriage had simply been the means to that end. Well, she had escaped. And now she had work and a room and the possibility of a future she could build for herself. It was more than she had dared hope for 4 months ago when Silas's family had thrown her out with nothing but the clothes on her back and accusations ringing in her ears. The next morning, Clara woke before dawn out of long habit. She washed in the basin, changed into her only other dress, also black, and went downstairs to find Elsie already at work. "Can't sleep past 5 anymore," Elsie explained, setting out the coffee. "Been getting up at this hour for 30 years. Body won't let me stop now even if I wanted to." They ate a simple breakfast of bread and jam, and then Elsie showed Clara the books that needed attention. It took one glance for Clara to see the disaster. "These haven't been properly balanced in months," she said, flipping through pages of hasty entries and arithmetic errors. "I know," Elsie admitted. "My husband used to handle it, but he passed 2 years back. I've been doing my best, but numbers were never my strength." "May I?" Clara gestured to the ledgers. "That's why you're here." Clara spent the morning lost in columns of figures, finding a strange comfort in the orderly world of debits and credits. Numbers didn't lie. Numbers didn't change their minds or blame you for things beyond your control. Numbers simply were. By noon, she had found the first discrepancy, $40 missing over the course of 6 months, taken in amounts small enough to avoid immediate notice, but large enough to add up. "Someone's been stealing from you," she told Elsie. Elsie's face went hard. "You're certain?" "The pattern is clear. Small amounts, always when the till would have had enough to cover the loss, without being obvious. Whoever is doing this knows your business well enough to know when you'd be least likely to notice." "That narrows it down," Elsie said grimly. "Only 3 people besides me have regular access to the till, my 2 clerks and Teresa Alvarez, who cleans the store twice a week." "I'll need to compare the entries with the days each person worked," Clara said. "That should tell us who." Word spread quickly through Redemption Valley that the mail-order bride who had been rejected was actually something of a genius with numbers. By afternoon, 3 other shop owners had come by to see if Clara might look at their books as well. "I can pay," said the owner of the dry goods store. "Not much, but something." "Let me finish Miss Elsie's books first," Clara said. "Then we can discuss terms." That evening, as she worked by lamplight, another knock came at her door. This time it was Wyatt Kincaid himself, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable in the extreme. "Miss Hartley," he said, "I wonder if I might have a word." Clara gestured him inside, though the room was too small for 2 people to feel anything but crowded. Wyatt remained standing, turning his hat in his hands like a man facing a judge. "I owe you more than an apology," he began. "I owe you an explanation. Those letters I sent, they were genuine, every word. But when it came time for you to actually arrive, I couldn't go through with it. My wife Rose died 6 years ago, when Billy was just 2. She got the scarlet fever while she was carrying our 2nd child. I couldn't save her. Couldn't save either of them." His voice cracked on the last words, and Clara saw the grief that still lived in him, raw as an open wound. "I swore then that I'd never put another woman through that kind of life," he continued. "Ranch life is hard, dangerous. Rose was strong, but it killed her anyway. And Billy, he needs a mother so bad it breaks my heart. But I can't ask another woman to take that risk, can't watch someone else I care about get ground down by this land." Clara listened to this confession and recognized the truth in it. Wyatt Kincaid wasn't cruel, he was afraid. "Mr. Kincaid," she said gently, "I appreciate your honesty, but you should know that I didn't come here expecting safety or ease. I came here because staying in Virginia meant dying by inches, ground down by other people's hatred and my own memories. I needed a new start, not a savior." "Still," Wyatt said, "it wasn't right letting you come all this way." "Perhaps not, but it brought me here, to work I'm good at, and a room of my own. That's more than I had before." Wyatt studied her with those storm-gray eyes, and Clara had the feeling he was seeing her properly for the first time, not as a potential wife or burden, but as a person in her own right. "Billy talks about you," he said finally, "says you promised you'd see him around town. He's a sweet boy, you've done well with him. He needs more than I can give. That's why I thought maybe a wife would help, but I was wrong to think I could just order one up like supplies from a catalog. People aren't that simple." "No," Clara agreed, "they're not." After Wyatt left, Clara returned to the ledgers, but she found herself thinking about Billy, about the loneliness in his young face when he talked about wanting a mother. She thought about Wyatt, too, carrying 6 years of grief and guilt like stones in his pockets. She understood that kind of burden. She had carried her own for 4 months now, the weight of being blamed for a death that wasn't her fault, the shame of being driven from her home, the fear that maybe Silas's family was right and she was somehow defective, broken, unworthy of love or safety. But sitting here in this small room, with honest work before her and the possibility of building something new, Clara felt the first stirrings of something she had thought dead. hope. 3 days later, Clara identified the thief. It was one of the clerks, a young man named Thomas, who had seemed helpful and earnest. The pattern of thefts matched his work schedule perfectly. Elsie confronted him that evening, and Thomas broke down immediately, confessing that he had been stealing to pay gambling debts. He returned what he could, $30, and left town that night on the eastbound stage. "I should have seen it," Elsie said, watching him go. "The signs were all there." "Signs are only obvious in hindsight," Clara told her. "Don't blame yourself for trusting someone." Word of Clara's discovery spread through town like wildfire. By Saturday, when the weekly cattle auction brought ranchers in from miles around, she had 3 more businesses asking for her help with their books. The next week passed in a rhythm that felt almost peaceful. Clara worked through Elsie's books, taught Billy on Saturday, and began taking on small jobs for other businesses. The money wasn't much, but it added up. By the end of her second week, she had earned enough to buy 2 new dresses and a proper pair of boots. It was the boots that made her feel truly settled. They were practical, sturdy, made for walking Texas dirt roads, not delicate Virginia slippers meant for parlors and social calls. These were the boots of a woman who planned to stay. The third Saturday of Clara's residence in Redemption Valley dawned with an unseasonable chill that promised autumn was finally coming to Texas. She woke to the sound of horses in the street below and the voices of men gathering for the weekly cattle auction. By now, the rhythm of the town had become familiar. Quiet weekdays punctuated by the controlled chaos of Saturday, when ranchers came from miles around to buy, sell, and trade. Clara dressed carefully in one of her new dresses, a practical brown calico that Elsie had helped her choose. She was pinning up her hair when she heard the commotion below louder than usual. Through her window she saw a group of riders surrounding Wyatt Kincaid's wagon. Even from this distance she could see the tension in Wyatt's shoulders. Billy sat beside his father on the wagon seat, his small face pale with fear. Clara was downstairs before she consciously decided to move. She pushed through the crowd gathering on the boardwalk and saw what had drawn their attention. In the back of Wyatt's wagon lay a boy, perhaps 10 years old, unconscious and bleeding from a gash on his head. What happened? Doc Henry Carter was already there, his medical bag open, examining the child with practiced efficiency. "Found him on my property this morning," Wyatt explained, his voice tight. "Looks like he was thrown from a horse. No sign of the animal, no sign of how he got there. Just lying in the north pasture like someone dumped him." "That's Miguel Reyes," someone in the crowd said. "Teresa Alvarez's nephew, the boy she brought from Mexico last year." Doc Carter worked quickly, cleaning the wound and checking the child's vital signs. "He needs to be kept warm and watched. Could be just a bad knock on the head, could be worse. Won't know until he wakes up." "Bring him to my place," Elsie said immediately. "I've got the room and Clara can help watch him." "I'll help too," Clara added without hesitation. "I've nursed sick children before." They carried Miguel upstairs to Clara's room, which had better light and ventilation than the store's back room. Doc Carter cleaned and stitched the head wound while Clara held the boy steady. His skin was hot to the touch, fever already building. "He'll need watching through the night," Doc Carter said. "If that fever spikes, send for me immediately. And if he starts vomiting or can't wake up proper, that's bad. Could mean bleeding inside the skull." Teresa Alvarez arrived within the hour, her face streaked with tears. She was a small woman, maybe 23, with the kind of quiet strength that came from surviving hard things. She had come to Redemption Valley a year ago, a widow with her orphaned nephew, and found work cleaning houses and doing laundry. "Thank you," she said to Wyatt, gripping his hand. "Thank you for bringing him." "Found him on my land," Wyatt said simply. "Couldn't leave him there." Teresa turned to Clara. "You will help watch him? Doc Carter says someone must stay." "Of course," Clara assured her. "You're welcome to stay too. We can take turns." Billy, who had been hovering anxiously by the door, spoke up. "Pa, can I stay and help? I could fetch water and things." Wyatt started to refuse, then saw the desperate need in his son's face. Billy wanted to be useful, wanted to help the way his father had helped. "If Miss Clara says it's all right," he said finally. Clara nodded. "Billy can be a great help. Come here, sweetheart. You can start by getting fresh water from the pump." Billy hurried off with the bucket, grateful for the task. Wyatt lingered, his hat in his hands. "I need to get back to the ranch," he said. "Got work that can't wait. But I'll come back this evening to check on things." "We'll manage," Clara told him. "Go do what you need to do." After Wyatt left, the long vigil began. Miguel remained unconscious, his breathing shallow, his fever climbing despite Clara's best efforts with cool cloths. Teresa sat by his side, murmuring prayers in Spanish, her rosary beads clicking softly through her fingers. Billy proved surprisingly helpful, fetching water, running messages to Doc Carter, and sitting quietly with Miguel when the women needed to rest. Clara watched him with growing respect. This was not a spoiled child or a weak one. This was a boy growing into the kind of man his father was, steady, reliable, willing to help where help was needed. As afternoon faded into evening, Miguel's fever spiked dangerously high. Clara sent Billy for Doc Carter, while she and Teresa worked to cool the boy's burning skin. The fever brought delirium, and Miguel thrashed and cried out in Spanish, calling for his mother. "She died 2 years ago," Teresa said quietly, her voice breaking. "Cholera took her and Miguel's father both. I am all he has left." "Then we'll make sure he survives," Clara said with more confidence than she felt. "I've seen children recover from worse." In truth, she had also seen children die from less. But Teresa needed hope right now, not brutal honesty. Doc Carter arrived and administered more medicine, some powder dissolved in water that made Miguel gag and cough. "This will help with the fever," he said, "but it's going to be a long night. The next few hours will tell us which way this goes." Wyatt returned as promised at dusk, bringing hot food from Mei Lin Chen's restaurant. The Chinese woman ran the only eating house in Redemption Valley, and her beef stew was legendary. Wyatt had brought enough for everyone. "Billy should come home," he said, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "I want to stay, Pa," Billy said. "Please." "I'm helping." Wyatt looked at his son, then at Clara, who nodded slightly. "All right," he said. "But you do what Miss Clara tells you, here?" "Yes, sir." After Wyatt left again, Clara, Billy, and Teresa settled into a rotation. One watched Miguel while the others rested. The night crawled by with agonizing slowness. The boy's fever remained dangerously high, and twice Clara thought she saw the flutter of his eyelids that might signal consciousness, only to have him slip back into delirium. It was Billy who was watching when Miguel finally opened his eyes fully, around 3 in the morning. The boy let out a shout that woke everyone. "He's awake! Miss Clara, he's awake!" Clara rushed to the bedside. Miguel's eyes were open and focused, though confused. He tried to sit up and immediately groaned, his hand going to his bandaged head. "Lie still," Clara told him gently. "You've had a bad knock. You're safe now." "Tia Teresa?" Miguel's voice was weak but clear. Teresa was there in an instant, tears streaming down her face, speaking rapid Spanish that Clara couldn't follow but understood perfectly. This was the language of relief, of prayers answered, of death averted. Doc Carter, summoned by Billy, arrived within 20 minutes and examined Miguel thoroughly. "Fever's breaking," he announced with satisfaction. "Looks like the boy's got a hard head. He'll need rest and care, but I think he'll recover just fine." The relief in the room was palpable. Teresa wept openly. Billy grinned so wide his face seemed split in two, and Clara felt something unlock in her chest, some tight knot of tension she hadn't realized she was carrying. As dawn broke over Redemption Valley, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Wyatt arrived to collect Billy. He found his son asleep in a chair beside Miguel's bed, having finally succumbed to exhaustion after seeing the boy safely awake. "You should have sent him home," Wyatt said to Clara, but there was no real reproach in his voice. "He wanted to stay," Clara replied, "and honestly, I needed his help. He's been wonderful." Wyatt looked at his sleeping son with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. Pride, certainly, but also something like wonder, as if he was seeing Billy clearly for the first time. "He's growing up," he said quietly. "Sometimes I forget he's not the baby I used to carry on my shoulders." "He's a good boy," Clara said. "You've raised him well. His mother did most of it those first 2 years. I've just been trying not to mess up what she started." This was the first time Wyatt had mentioned his wife directly to Clara. She sensed an opening, a chance to understand the grief that drove him. "What was she like?" Clara asked gently. "Rose?" Wyatt was quiet for so long that Clara thought he wouldn't answer. Then, still looking at Billy, he began to speak. "Rose was sunshine in human form. That's what I always thought. She could find joy in anything, a wildflower growing between rocks, a bird's nest in the barn, the way the light hit the water in the creek. She made everything better just by being there." His voice grew rough. "She got sick so fast. One day she was fine, laughing, planning the nursery for the baby. 3 days later, she was burning with fever. 4 days after that, she was gone, and the baby with her." "I'm sorry," Clara said, because there were no other words. "I couldn't save her," Wyatt continued. "I rode for Doc Carter as fast as my horse could run. He came, did everything he could. But scarlet fever doesn't care about how much you love someone or how hard you try. It just takes and takes until there's nothing left. It wasn't your fault, wasn't it? I brought her out here to the middle of nowhere. No close neighbors, no real doctor in town back then, just a traveling medicine man who showed up once a month if we were lucky. If we'd stayed in Missouri where she was from, near real doctors and hospitals, maybe she would have lived." Clara understood this kind of guilt. She had carried her own version for 4 months, the constant whisper that maybe if she had been a better wife, Silas wouldn't have drunk so much. Maybe if she had been more patient, more understanding, more something, he would have changed. "My husband drank himself to death," she said. "For a long time I thought it was my fault. His family certainly said it was. They said a good wife could have kept him sober, could have made him want to be better. It took me months to understand that I couldn't save someone who didn't want to be saved. His choices were his own, not mine." Wyatt turned to look at her fully. "Is that why you answered my advertisement? To escape them?" "Partly, but also because I needed to prove to myself that I could survive without their approval or support, that I wasn't the failure they said I was." "You're not a failure," Wyatt said with quiet conviction. "Anyone can see that." "Neither are you," Clara replied. "Rose's death wasn't your fault any more than Silas's was mine. We can't control fever or addiction or any of the 1,000 things that can destroy the people we love. We can only do our best and hope it's enough." They stood there in the early morning light, 2 people carrying similar burdens, and something shifted between them. Not attraction, not yet, but recognition, understanding, the knowledge that here was someone who truly comprehended the weight of guilt and loss. Billy stirred and woke, blinking sleepily. "Pa, is it morning already?" "Past morning, son. Time we headed home. You've got chores waiting." Billy scrambled up, suddenly aware that he had slept past his usual waking time. "I'm sorry, Pa. I didn't mean to fall asleep." "You did good work here," Wyatt assured him. "Real good work. I'm proud of you." The boy's face lit up at his father's praise. "Can we come back tomorrow to check on Miguel?" "We'll see." After they left, Clara helped Teresa settle Miguel more comfortably. The boy was weak but conscious, asking for water and complaining about his headache, both of which Doc Carter had said were good signs. "Thank you," Teresa said again. "I have no money to pay you for your kindness, but I will work. I can clean, do laundry, whatever you need." "You don't owe me anything," Clara said. "We helped because it was the right thing to do." "Still, I remember kindness," Teresa said, "and I repay debts." Clara was too tired to argue. She left Teresa with Miguel and stumbled to the back room Elsie had prepared for her, collapsing onto the cot without even removing her dress. She slept deeply and dreamlessly for 4 hours. When she woke, it was past noon. Elsie had managed the store alone and now sat at Clara's bedside with a cup of coffee and a knowing smile. "You're good in a crisis," she observed. "Cool-headed. Most women would have panicked." "I've had practice," Clara said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "My youngest brother used to get terrible fevers. I sat up with him more nights than I can count." "The one you mentioned to Billy?" Clara nodded. "Thomas. He died when he was 12. Pneumonia. After that, my mother was never quite the same. She died a year later. My father said it was a fever, but I think it was just grief. She couldn't survive losing her baby." "And you were left to manage the household?" "Me and Sam, my older brother, we kept things running until I married Silas. Sam joined the Army after that, wanted to get away. Last I heard, he was working ranches in Colorado." Elsie patted her hand. "You've had your share of loss, haven't you?" "No more than most," Clara said. "Everyone loses someone." "True enough. But some people let the loss destroy them. You didn't." Clara thought about that as she dressed and returned to work. Had she let loss destroy her? Sometimes it felt like the Clara who had existed before her mother's death was a completely different person, someone naive and hopeful who believed good things lasted. That Clara had died slowly over the years, replaced by someone harder, more cautious, less likely to trust in happiness. But maybe that wasn't destruction. Maybe that was just survival. The next week settled into a new rhythm. Miguel recovered quickly, as children do, though Doc Carter insisted he stay quiet for at least 2 weeks. Teresa stayed at the store to nurse him, sleeping on a pallet beside his bed, and paid for their room and board by helping Elsie with the heavy work. After 2 weeks, when Miguel was well enough, Teresa returned to work at Kincaid Ranch part-time, coming twice a week to help with the washing and heavier chores. Wyatt and Billy came by every day to check on Miguel's progress. Billy and the Mexican boy became fast friends despite the language barrier, communicating in the universal language of childhood, laughter, and imagination. They played quiet games in the sick room, Billy teaching Miguel English words and Miguel teaching Billy Spanish ones. Wyatt, meanwhile, began lingering after checking on the boys. He would help Elsie move heavy boxes or repair a loose board on the porch. Useful tasks that needed doing, but that Clara suspected were also excuses to stay. She found herself looking forward to his visits. They didn't talk much, both being naturally quiet people, but there was something companionable about working in the same space. Wyatt would fix things while Clara balanced books, and occasionally their eyes would meet and they would share a small smile of mutual understanding. It was Billy who first suggested the arrangement that would change everything. "Pa," he said one evening as they prepared to leave, "you know how the ranch accounts are all confused? And how you said you needed someone to help straighten them out? Miss Clara is real good at that kind of thing." Wyatt shot his son a look that suggested he knew exactly what the boy was doing. "Miss Clara has plenty of work already." "Actually," Clara said before she could stop herself, "I've nearly finished everything Elsie needed, and the other shopkeeper's books aren't enough to fill my time." "I couldn't ask you to take on more," Wyatt said. "You've done enough for us already." "You're not asking. I'm offering. And I'd charge my normal rate, of course. This would be business." Wyatt hesitated, clearly torn. Clara could see the war in his face, his need for help battling against his reluctance to become indebted to her, to let her into his life in any significant way. Billy, with the ruthless insight of children, pushed harder. "Please, Pa? The accounts are a mess. And you said just last week you thought someone might be cheating you on the feed prices." That decided it. The possibility of being cheated was something no rancher could ignore. "All right," Wyatt said. "If you're willing, I'd appreciate your help. We can discuss terms." They settled on $2 a week plus room and board for as long as the work took. Clara would move to the ranch, taking over the room that had belonged to Teresa before she moved to town to care for Miguel. "It'll save me the ride back and forth," Wyatt said, justifying the arrangement to himself as much as to her. and Billy could continue his lessons without interrupting your work. Clara packed her few belongings with mixed feelings. Part of her recognized this for what it was, a dangerous blurring of the careful lines she had drawn around her new life. She was supposed to be building independence, not moving into a widower's home. But another part of her, the part that had felt something shift during those long hours watching over Miguel, wanted this. Wanted to see where this strange friendship with Wyatt Kincaid might lead. Wanted to spend more time with Billy, teaching him and watching him grow. Wanted, quite simply, to belong to something more than just her work. Elsie saw her off with a knowing look. "You be careful out there," she said. "Wyatt Kincaid is a good man, but he's also a man carrying a mountain of grief. Don't let him bury you under it." "I'm just going to do his accounts," Clara protested. "Of course you are, dear, of course you are." The ride out to Kincaid Ranch took nearly an hour, the wagon rolling through increasingly wild country. They passed other ranches, some prosperous-looking with painted houses and sturdy fences, others barely hanging on with sagging barns and weedy corrals. "That's Jack Donovan's place," Wyatt said, pointing to a sprawling ranch house visible in the distance. "The Double D. He's got near about 1,000 acres, twice what I have. Been trying to buy me out for years. Why? Railroad's coming through. Rumors are they want a route that cuts through both our properties. Jack's already agreed to sell them what they need. Figures if he can get my land too, he can charge them even more." "And you don't want to sell?" Wyatt's jaw tightened. "This land is all I have to give Billy. It's his inheritance, his future. I'm not selling it so some railroad baron can get rich while my son ends up with nothing." Clara understood. Land meant security, legacy, proof that your life had meant something. Giving it up would feel like betraying not just Billy, but Rose too, the woman who had helped build this ranch before fever took her. Kincaid Ranch, when they finally reached it, was modest but well-maintained. The house was a single-story adobe structure, practical rather than beautiful, with a wide porch that faced east to catch the morning sun. The barn was larger than the house, sturdy and freshly painted. Corrals held several horses, and perhaps 50 head of cattle grazed in the near pasture. "It's not much," Wyatt said, suddenly self-conscious. "But it's honest work and honest living." "It's more than most people have," Clara said. "You should be proud." In P, the house bore all the hallmarks of male habitation. Clean enough, but spare, with none of the small touches that made a house a home. No curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floors, no pictures on the walls. Just furniture and necessities. Teresa had left things organized in the kitchen before moving to town. Clara's room, off the kitchen with its own door to the outside as promised, was small but adequate. A narrow bed, a dresser, a chair, a window that looked out toward the barn. "I'll leave you to settle in," Wyatt said. "Supper's at 6. Nothing fancy, just whatever we can manage." After he left, Clara unpacked her belongings and tried not to think too hard about what she had just done. She had moved into the home of a man she barely knew, based on nothing more than instinct and a child's need for help with arithmetic. It was either very brave or very foolish, and she wasn't sure which. That first evening, she, Wyatt, and Billy ate a simple meal of beans and cornbread at the kitchen table. The conversation was stilted at first, all three of them aware of the strangeness of this new arrangement. But Billy, bless him, filled the silences with chatter about Miguel and his lessons and a bird's nest he had found in the barn. And gradually the tension eased. After supper, Clara asked to see the ranch accounts. Wyatt brought out a wooden box filled with papers, receipts, invoices, scrawled notes on scraps. Some dated back years. There was no organization, no system, just a chaotic collection of financial fragments. Clara's fingers itched to sort through it all, to make sense of the chaos. But it was late, and she could see the exhaustion in Wyatt's face. "Tomorrow," she said. "I'll start fresh in the morning." That night, lying in her narrow bed with unfamiliar sounds outside her window, the lowing of cattle, the creak of the barn, the distant call of a coyote, Clara felt something she hadn't felt in months. She felt almost at peace. The next morning, Clara woke at dawn to find Wyatt already gone, out working the ranch with Buck Morrison, his foreman. Billy appeared in the kitchen, sleepy-eyed and hungry, and Clara made breakfast. Eggs from the henhouse, bacon from the smokehouse, coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. "You cook good," Billy said appreciatively. "Pa tries, but he mostly makes things too salty or too burned." After breakfast, Clara set Billy up with his lessons at the kitchen table while she began the monumental task of organizing Wyatt's accounts. She worked methodically, sorting receipts by year, then by vendor, creating categories and columns. What she found troubled her. For the past 2 years, Wyatt had been paying significantly more than market rate for cattle feed from a supplier in Fort Worth. The amounts were small enough not to be immediately obvious, an extra $1 here, $2 there, but over time it added up to nearly $300. Either the supplier was systematically overcharging or someone was taking kickbacks. Either way, Wyatt was being robbed. When Wyatt came in for lunch, dusty and tired, Clara showed him what she had found. His face darkened as he studied the figures. "That son of a—" He stopped, glancing at Billy. "That's a lot of money." "It is. And it's been going on for at least 2 years, possibly longer. Your records before that are too incomplete to tell." "Who's doing it?" "I don't know yet, but I can find out. Do you have the names of everyone who handles your supply orders?" Wyatt listed 3 people, himself, Buck Morrison, and a ranch hand named Pete, who had left 6 months ago. "I'll need to cross-reference the dates of the overcharges with who was doing the ordering," Clara said. "That should tell us." She worked through the afternoon while Wyatt returned to the range. Billy sat nearby, ostensibly doing his arithmetic, but mostly watching Clara with open fascination. "You're real smart, aren't you, Miss Clara?" he said finally. "I'm just good with numbers. Everyone's good at something." "What's Pa good at?" Clara thought about this. "Your father is good at taking care of things. The ranch, the animals, you. He sees what needs doing, and he does it without complaining." "He's sad a lot, though," Billy said with a child's brutal honesty. "Since Ma died. He tries to hide it, but I can tell." "Loss is hard," Clara said gently. "Sometimes it takes a long time to stop being sad. Were you sad when your husband died?" The question caught her off guard. "That's complicated. I was sad that anyone had to die that way, but mostly I was relieved." "Because he was mean to you?" Clara stopped her work and looked at Billy properly. "What makes you say that?" "I heard Pa talking to Doc Carter. He said your husband was a drunk who hurt you. Is that true?" There seemed little point in lying. "Yes, my husband was not a kind man when he drank, which was most of the time." "I'm glad he's dead then," Billy said fiercely. "You're nice. You shouldn't have been hurt." Clara's throat tightened. "Thank you, Billy. If anyone tries to hurt you here, me and Pa will stop them." It was such an earnest declaration from such a small boy that Clara had to turn away to hide her tears. When had anyone last offered to protect her? When had she last felt like someone might actually care enough to try? By evening, she had her answer about the feed supplier. The pattern was clear. The overcharges had stopped 6 months ago, right when Pete left. Which meant Pete had either been taking kickbacks from the supplier or was the supplier's man inside the ranch, feeding them information about when to inflate prices. "Pete," Wyatt said when she told him, "should have known. He was always hanging around town more than working, said he was courting some girl, but I always wondered." "Is there anything you can do?" Clara asked. "Pete's long gone, headed to California last I heard, and proving he was stealing would be near impossible. But I can switch suppliers, which will stop the bleeding at least." He looked at the neat columns Clara had created, the organized receipts, the clear accounting of every penny spent and earned. "You did all this in one day?" The work needed doing. Wyatt shook his head in wonder. "What I offered to pay you isn't near enough. This would have taken me months, if I could have figured it out at all." "You're paying me fairly," Clara said, "and I'm enjoying the work." That wasn't entirely true. What she was enjoying was being here, in this house, with these people. But she wasn't ready to admit that yet, not even to herself. That night, the three of them fell into an easy routine. Clara cooked supper while Wyatt washed up and Billy set the table. They ate together, talking about the day's events. After supper, Wyatt taught Billy how to rope fence posts while Clara cleaned up, and then they all sat on the porch as the sun set, watching the day fade to darkness. It felt, Clara thought with some alarm, dangerously close to a family. The days passed in this fashion, settling into a rhythm that felt both natural and frightening. Clara worked on the accounts, taught Billy his lessons, and slowly brought order to the chaos of Wyatt's business. She discovered other problems, debts that could be negotiated down, contracts that could be renegotiated, small efficiencies that could save money. And Wyatt, watching her work this quiet magic with his ranch's finances, began to see her differently. Not as the mail-order bride he had rejected or even as a useful employee, but as someone remarkable in her own right, someone who saw problems and solved them, who helped without expecting gratitude, who made everything around her work better simply by being there. Late one evening, nearly 4 weeks after Clara's arrival at the ranch, Billy had gone to bed and Clara was finishing up the day's work at the kitchen table. Wyatt sat across from her, supposedly reading a newspaper, but mostly just watching her work. "You remind me of her sometimes," he said suddenly. Clara looked up. "Your wife?" Wyatt nodded. "Rose was always fixing things, making things better. She'd see a problem and attack it until it was solved. You do that too." "I hope that doesn't make you uncomfortable." "It did at first. That's why I pulled back on the mail order arrangement. I was afraid you'd be too much like her, that it would hurt too much. But you're not really like her at all. She was sunshine and laughter. You're more like steady rain, quiet, persistent, nourishing everything you touch." Clara didn't know what to say to that. It was perhaps the most words Wyatt had strung together in her presence, and they struck something deep inside her. "I'll take that as a compliment," she managed finally. "It is one, the highest I know how to give." They sat in comfortable silence after that, the lamplight creating a small circle of warmth against the vast darkness outside. And Clara felt that dangerous hope stirring again, stronger now, harder to ignore. She was falling into something here, something that felt like home but might just be another kind of trap. The smart thing would be to finish the accounts and return to town, to the safety of independence and solitude. But when had she ever done the smart thing? That question haunted her until 3 nights later, when she woke to the smell of smoke. The barn was on fire. Clara ran to the window and saw flames climbing the wooden walls, bright orange against the night sky. She heard horses screaming inside. "Fire!" she shouted, running from her room. "Wyatt, the barn's on fire!" They fought it together, Wyatt and Buck and Clara, hauling water until their arms ached. They saved the horses and stopped the fire from spreading, but one corner of the barn was destroyed. At dawn, Wyatt found a piece of cloth near where the fire started. It smelled like kerosene. "Someone set this," he said quietly. Clara looked toward the ridge and saw a rider watching them. Even from far away, she recognized Jack Donovan's hat. The rider turned and rode away slowly, like he had all the time in the world. "He's not going to stop," Clara whispered. "No," Wyatt agreed. "This is just the beginning." October arrived in Redemption Valley with cooler mornings and the promise of rain that never quite materialized. Clara had been at Kincaid Ranch for 5 weeks, and the place had transformed under her quiet efficiency. The accounts were not only organized but optimized. She had renegotiated contracts, identified waste, and discovered revenue opportunities Wyatt had never considered. More importantly, the house had begun to feel like a home. Clara couldn't help herself. She had bought fabric in town and sewn simple curtains for the windows. She had planted herbs in a small garden by the kitchen door. She had filled a jar with wildflowers that Billy brought her from his explorations of the ranch. Small touches, she told herself, nothing permanent. nothing that couldn't be undone when her work here was finished. But the truth was becoming harder to ignore. She didn't want to leave, and from the way Wyatt watched her sometimes, his eyes soft with something like wonder, she thought maybe he didn't want her to leave either. They were dancing around something, both of them, circling closer, but never quite touching. Both too afraid of what might happen if they named the thing growing between them. It was Billy who forced the issue, though not in the way anyone expected. Billy had complained of a sore throat the evening before, but Clara thought it was nothing serious. But the next morning, the boy woke burning with fever, his small body shaking with chills despite the blankets Clara piled on him. By afternoon, the fever had climbed so high that Billy became delirious, crying out for his mother in a voice that broke Clara's heart. Wyatt rode for Doc Carter at a gallop, leaving Clara alone with the terrified child. She had experience with childhood fevers, but that didn't make this any less frightening. Billy was so small, so fragile in his sickness, and the memory of another child's fever, another desperate vigil by a sickbed, threatened to overwhelm her. Thomas had been 12 when pneumonia took him. She had sat with him for 3 days, watching helplessly as the fever consumed him from within. On the third night, he had asked for their mother, not understanding that she was already gone. Clara had held his hand and lied, told him mother would be there soon, that everything would be all right. He had died believing it. She couldn't let that happen to Billy, wouldn't let it happen. Doc Carter arrived within the hour, his face grave as he examined the boy. "Scarlet fever," he pronounced. "Same thing that took his mother." Clara saw Wyatt go pale, saw him grip the doorframe like a drowning man clutching driftwood. "No," he whispered. "Not again." "Now hold on," Doc Carter said firmly. "Billy's a strong boy and we've caught it early. He's got a fighting chance. But he'll need careful nursing. The fever has to be managed, kept from getting too high. And he'll need fluids, as much as we can get into him." "I'll do it," Clara said. "I've nursed sick children before." "It's dangerous," Doc Carter warned. "Scarlet fever is catching. You could get it yourself. I had it as a child. I'm immune." Wyatt turned to her, his face a mask of fear and desperate hope. "You don't have to do this. I can't ask you to risk yourself. You're not asking. I'm choosing." What followed were 3 of the longest days of Clara's life. She moved a chair into Billy's room and barely left it, sponging his burning skin with cool water, coaxing sips of broth past his cracked lips, changing his sweat-soaked nightshirt every few hours. Wyatt hovered at the doorway, unable to come too close but unwilling to leave. He brought fresh water, clean cloths, anything Clara needed. But she could see the terror in his eyes, the certainty that he was about to lose his son the same way he had lost his wife. On the second night, Billy's fever spiked dangerously high. He thrashed and cried out, lost in delirium. Clara held him down gently but firmly, desperately trying to cool his burning skin. "Mama!" Billy cried, reaching for something only he could see. "Mama, don't go!" Wyatt made a sound like a wounded animal and turned away, his shoulders shaking. Clara's own eyes burned with tears, but she couldn't afford to break down now. "I'm here, sweetheart," she murmured to Billy, not claiming to be his mother, but offering comfort nonetheless. "You're safe. I've got you." She remembered a remedy her own mother had used, something the old women in Virginia swore by for breaking dangerous fevers. It required herbs Clara didn't have, but Teresa Alvarez might. Clara sent Wyatt racing into town with a hastily scrawled list. He returned within 2 hours, Teresa herself riding with him. The Mexican woman took one look at Billy and immediately began preparing the herbal tea, muttering prayers in Spanish as she worked. "This helped my Miguel," she told Clara, "when the fever would not break. Old medicine from my grandmother." They got the bitter brew into Billy one painful spoonful at a time. The boy fought them, too delirious to understand they were trying to help, but Clara was relentless, and gradually, impossibly, the fever began to drop. By morning, Billy's skin was cooler, his breathing steadied, and when the sun rose over Kincaid Ranch, The boy opened his eyes and asked for water in a voice that was weak but clear. Clara sagged in her chair, suddenly aware that she hadn't slept in nearly 48 hours. Teresa caught her before she could fall. "Sleep now," the Mexican woman said gently. "I will watch him. You have done enough." Clara stumbled to her own room and collapsed onto the bed without even removing her dress. She slept deeply, dreamlessly, for 12 hours straight. When she woke, it was dark again. For a moment, disoriented, she couldn't remember where she was or what had happened. Then it all came rushing back. Billy's fever, the desperate hours, the fear that had tasted like ashes in her mouth. She rushed to Billy's room and found Wyatt sitting beside the bed, holding his son's hand. Billy was sleeping peacefully now, his color almost normal, his breathing easy. "The fever broke completely around noon," Wyatt said without looking up. "Doc Carter says he's out of danger, says he'll need rest and care, but he'll recover just fine." "Thank God," Clara whispered. Wyatt finally looked at her then, and the expression on his face took her breath away. It was raw and open and full of something that looked very much like love. "You saved him," he said, his voice breaking. "Just like you saved Miguel. You have a gift for that, for bringing people back from the edge. I just did what needed doing." "No." Wyatt stood, moving toward her with purpose. "No, it was more than that. You risked yourself. You didn't sleep, didn't eat, barely rested. You poured everything you had into saving my boy." "Of course I did. I care about Billy." "And that's why—" Wyatt stopped, seeming to struggle with words. "That's why I need to say something I should have said weeks ago." Clara's heart began to pound. "Wyatt, you don't have to." "Yes, I do, because I was wrong. Wrong to send that telegram canceling the arrangement. Wrong to think I could protect myself from caring by keeping everyone at arm's length. Wrong to believe that honoring Rose's memory meant never loving anyone again." He took her hands in his calloused palms warm against her skin. "Clara May Hartley, you came here with 29 cents and a broken heart. And somehow you've put this whole ranch back together. The accounts, the house, Billy's education. Everything runs better because you're here. But more than that, you've reminded me what it feels like to hope again, to believe that maybe the future could be something more than just survival." Clara felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "I care about you too," she managed. "Both of you. More than I thought I could care about anyone after Silas. But I'm afraid, what if I'm not enough? What if I fail you the way I failed him? You didn't fail Silas. He failed you. And I'm not asking you to fix me or save me or be anything other than what you already are. I'm just asking if maybe you could stay, not as an employee, as family." "Are you asking me to marry you?" Wyatt smiled, and it transformed his entire face. "I'm asking if you'd consider it. No pressure, no rush. Just think about it. Think about whether you could be happy here, with us, building something together." Clara thought about the past few weeks. The quiet satisfaction of bringing order to chaos. The joy of teaching Billy and watching him grow. The comfortable evenings on the porch, watching the sun set over land that felt increasingly like home. She thought about Wyatt's steady presence, his quiet strength, the way he made her feel safe without making her feel weak, the way he respected her intelligence and valued her contributions, the way he looked at her sometimes like she was something precious and unexpected. And she thought about Billy, sweet Billy, who drew her pictures and called her Miss Clara, and had asked just yesterday before he got sick whether she might stay forever. "I don't need to think about it," she said. "The answer is yes." Wyatt pulled her into his arms then, holding her like she was something infinitely valuable and incredibly fragile. Clara rested her head against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart, and felt, for the first time since her mother died, like she was exactly where she belonged. They might have stayed like that for hours, but Billy's voice interrupted them. "Pa, Miss Clara, I'm thirsty." They broke apart laughing, both wiping tears from their eyes. Billy was sitting up in bed, looking weak but alert, his gray eyes curious. "What's happening?" he asked. "Why are you both crying?" "Happy tears," Wyatt explained. "Miss Clara has agreed to stay with us for good." Billy's face split into the widest smile Clara had ever seen. "You mean like a real mama?" "If that's all right with you," Clara said, sitting on the edge of his bed. "All right? It's the best thing ever." Billy threw his arms around her neck, and Clara held him carefully, mindful of his weakness. Over the boy's shoulder, she caught Wyatt's eye and saw her own joy reflected there. They had found their way to each other through loss and fear, and the simple human need for connection. It wasn't the story she had imagined when she answered that mail-order bride advertisement. It was better, but their happiness was short-lived. 3 days later, when Billy was well on his way to recovery and Clara was beginning to plan a quiet wedding, Jack Donovan made his move. It started with a visitor. Ezra Pike was a thin, nervous man who arrived at the ranch in a lawyer's buggy, accompanied by Sheriff Tom Braddock. The sheriff looked deeply uncomfortable, which immediately put Clara on alert. "Wyatt," Sheriff Braddock said heavily, "we need to talk about a legal matter. Mr. Pike here has some papers that concern your ranch." Ezra Pike opened his leather case and produced a document covered in official-looking seals and signatures. "Mr. Kincaid, I represent the estate of the late Jeremiah Kincaid, your father. According to these documents, dated 1880, you borrowed $800 from Mr. Jack Donovan to pay your father's funeral expenses and settle his debts. The loan was to be repaid within 5 years, with interest. That deadline has now passed, and the debt remains outstanding." Wyatt's face went white. "That's a lie. I never borrowed money from Jack Donovan. I paid for my father's funeral with money Rose and I had saved." "Do you have documentation of that payment?" Pike asked smoothly. "The bank in Fort Worth would have records," Wyatt said. "That's where we withdrew the money." "The First Bank of Fort Worth burned down in 1881, Pike said. "All records were destroyed. I verified this." Clara felt ice forming in her stomach. This was too convenient, too perfect. Jack Donovan had been planning this for years, waiting for the moment when the evidence would be impossible to gather. "This is fraud," she said sharply. "Pure and simple fraud. That document is probably forged." "The signatures have been authenticated by a handwriting expert," Pike said, not even looking at her. "And the document was properly filed with the county clerk in 1880. Everything is legal and above board." Sheriff Braddock cleared his throat. "I'm sorry, Wyatt, but if the debt is real and unpaid, the law is clear. Mr. Donovan can claim the ranch in settlement, unless you can pay the $800 plus interest, which comes to about $1,200 total." $1,200. It might as well have been $12 million. Wyatt didn't have that kind of money. The ranch was doing better thanks to Clara's work, but not that much better. "I need time," Wyatt said desperately. "Time to find proof that this is fake." "The court has granted a stay of 30 days, Pike said. "If you cannot provide documentation proving the debt was already paid, or if you cannot pay the full amount owed, the ranch will be transferred to Mr. Donovan's ownership at the end of that period." After they left, Wyatt sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "This is it. This is how I lose everything. Rose's ranch, Billy's inheritance, everything we built." "No," Clara said firmly. "We're not giving up that easily. There has to be proof somewhere. We just have to find it." "How? The bank records are gone. My father's dead. Rose is dead. Anyone who might have known about that time is either gone or has no reason to remember a transaction from 7 years ago." Clara's mind raced. "Elsie Tucker. She's been in Redemption Valley for decades. She knows everyone, sees everything that happens in town. If you paid cash for your father's funeral, you would have needed to arrange it with someone. The undertaker, maybe, or the minister. Elsie would remember." Hope flickered in Wyatt's eyes. "It's worth asking." They rode into town that afternoon, leaving Billy in Teresa's care. Elsie listened to their story with growing anger. "Jack Donovan is a snake," she said bluntly. Always has been. And yes, I remember when your father died, Wyatt. You and Rose came into my store to buy the cloth for his burial suit. You paid cash, $35, and you mentioned you'd just withdrawn your savings to cover the funeral costs. I remember because Rose cried, said she hated using the money you'd been saving for a new barn, but there was no choice. Would you testify to that? Clara asked eagerly. Of course, but my memory won't be enough to prove anything in court. We need documentation. Clara thought hard. Where did you bury your father, Wyatt? Cemetery behind the church. Pastor Owen Grant performed the service. Then Pastor Grant would have records, church records of burials, payments for services. If you paid him directly, he would have written it down. They found Pastor Owen Grant at the church, a white-haired man with kind eyes and a steel-trap memory. Yes, he remembered Jeremiah Kincaid's funeral. Yes, Wyatt had paid him directly in cash for the burial plot and services, and yes, he had records. The pastor led them to his office and pulled out a leather-bound ledger, its pages yellowed with age. There, in fading ink, dated June 1880, was an entry, Burial Services for Jeremiah Kincaid, paid in full by Wyatt Kincaid. Amount? $45. This proves I had money then, Wyatt said. Money I wouldn't have needed to borrow. It's a start, Clara said, but we need more. We need to prove the entire funeral was paid for without borrowed money. Over the next week, Clara threw herself into the investigation with the same focused intensity she had brought to Wyatt's accounts. She tracked down the carpenter who had made Jeremiah's coffin. Paid in cash. Documented. The man who dug the grave. Paid in cash. Witnessed by 2 others. The woman who prepared the body. Paid in cash. Remembered clearly because Rose had given her an extra $1 as thanks. Each piece of evidence was small by itself, but together they painted a clear picture. Wyatt and Rose had paid for everything themselves. There had been no need to borrow from Jack Donovan or anyone else. But they still couldn't prove that the loan document was fraudulent. Pike's handwriting expert had authenticated Wyatt's signature, and the county clerk confirmed the document had been properly filed in 1880. How is that possible? Wyatt demanded. I never signed anything for Jack Donovan. Clara studied the document for the 100th time, and suddenly something clicked. The date, she said. Look at the date. June 15th, 1880, but your father died June 3rd. You buried him June 5th. Why would you borrow money on June 15th, 10 days after you'd already paid for everything? You wouldn't, Elsie said, seeing where Clara was going, unless someone backdated a document to make it look like the loan happened when it did. But Wyatt's signature is on it, Pastor Grant pointed out. The expert verified it. What if it's a real signature but from a different document? Clara was thinking fast now. What if Jack Donovan got Wyatt to sign something innocent, then transferred the signature onto this loan document? That's possible? Wyatt asked. I've heard of it being done, Elsie said. Seen it once, actually, in a fraud case years ago. Man got another man to sign a receipt for goods, then carefully removed the signature and pasted it onto a promissory note. The signature was genuine, but the document it was on wasn't. How do we prove it? Clara demanded. You'd need the original document, Elsie said, the one Wyatt actually signed. If you could show what he really signed that day, it would prove the loan document is fraudulent. But what had Wyatt signed in June 1880? He couldn't remember. It had been 7 years ago, in a time of grief and stress. He had signed dozens of documents that month, receipts, contracts, delivery confirmations. Clara was ready to scream with frustration when Billy, who had been listening quietly from his sickbed, spoke up. Pa, didn't you tell me once about the papers from when you first bought the cattle from Mr. Donovan? You said you kept them because Ma made you, said you should always keep records of big purchases. Wyatt's eyes widened. The cattle sale, June 1880. I bought 50 head from Jack to restock after the harsh winter. Paid $500, signed a bill of sale. Where are those papers? Clara asked urgently. In the lockbox in the barn, Rose insisted I keep all important documents there in case of fire. They found the lockbox buried under feed sacks right where Wyatt had left it years ago. Inside were property deeds, Rose's death certificate, Billy's birth record, and at the bottom a faded bill of sale dated June 15, 1880. Clara held it up to the light, comparing it to the loan document. The date was the same. The signatures were identical. Too identical. This is it, she breathed. Jack transferred your signature from this bill of sale onto the fake loan document. That's why they're both dated June 15th. He used the same day to make it look authentic. But how do we prove that? Wyatt asked. Clara examined both documents carefully with a magnifying glass Elsie provided. After several minutes, she found what she was looking for. Tiny score marks around the signature on the loan document, barely visible but definitely there. Marks that would be made by carefully cutting and pasting. This, she said triumphantly, this proves the signature was transferred. Any document expert worth their salt should be able to confirm it. Sheriff Braddock, when shown the evidence, agreed to bring in an independent expert from Austin. The examination took 3 days, but the verdict was clear. The signature on the loan document showed evidence of having been transferred from another document. The loan was fraudulent. Jack Donovan, when confronted, tried to bluster his way out of it. But the evidence was overwhelming, and even Ezra Pike had to admit the loan document was fake. I trusted my client's word, Pike said weakly. I had no idea the document was fraudulent. Jack was arrested for fraud and attempted theft. As the sheriff led him away in handcuffs, he turned to glare at Wyatt and Clara. "You think you've won?" he snarled. "This isn't over. I'll get this ranch one way or another." "Not legally you won't," Sheriff Braddock said firmly. "And if I catch you trying anything illegal, you'll spend the rest of your life in prison. Count on it." The threat was far from idle. The court not only dismissed the fraudulent debt, but also ordered Jack to pay Wyatt's legal expenses and a fine for attempted fraud. Unable to pay, Jack was forced to sell off a portion of his own land. The irony was not lost on anyone in Redemption Valley. The man who had tried to steal Wyatt's ranch ended up losing part of his own. But the victory, sweet as it was, came with a cost. The stress and fear had taken their toll on Wyatt. The night after Jack's arrest, Clara found him standing in the barn, staring at the spot where Rose had kept her garden tools. "I almost lost it all," he said quietly. "This land, this legacy, Billy's future. If it hadn't been for you and your sharp mind and your refusal to give up, Jack would have won." "But he didn't win," Clara said, moving to stand beside him. "We beat him, together." "Together," Wyatt repeated. He turned to her, his storm-gray eyes intense. "I keep thinking about that word. How much better it sounds than alone." He took her hands. "I know we talked about waiting, about taking our time, but these past weeks have shown me that life is too uncertain to waste. I don't want to wait another day to make you my wife, to make us a real family." Clara felt her heart swell. "Neither do I." They were married a week later, in late October 1883, in the small white church, with Pastor Owen Grant officiating and most of Redemption Valley in attendance. Clara wore a simple dress of cream-colored cotton that Elsie and Teresa had helped her make. Billy stood up with his father, proud as a peacock in his Sunday best. Elsie cried. Doc Carter smiled. Even Sheriff Braddock looked pleased. And when Wyatt kissed his bride at the altar, sealing their union, the church erupted in applause. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food brought by half the town. Mei Lin Chen contributed her famous dumplings. Teresa made tamales. Elsie brought 3 pies. It was a feast born of community and celebration. As the sun set and people began to head home, Clara stood on the porch of what was now truly her home, watching Billy chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. Wyatt came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Happy?" he asked. "More than I ever thought possible," she admitted. "I never thought I'd say this again, but I'm happy too. Rose would be glad, I think. She always said the ranch needed life and laughter. You've brought both." Clara leaned back against him, savoring the solid warmth of his presence. "We'll honor her memory by building something good here, something worth passing on to Billy and whatever other children we might have." "Other children?" Wyatt sounded hopeful. "Eventually, if God wills it." They stood there in peaceful silence as the stars began to emerge, one by one, in the darkening sky. And Clara thought about the journey that had brought her here, from Virginia to Texas, from desperation to hope, from loneliness to love. She had arrived with 29 cents and a broken heart. She was staying with a family, a home, and a future bright with possibility. The years that followed were not easy. Ranching never was. There were droughts and hard winters, cattle prices that fluctuated wildly, and the constant challenges of frontier life. Jack Donovan, released from prison after 2 years, tried once more to cause trouble before giving up and moving to California. But through it all, Clara and Wyatt built something lasting. The ranch prospered under their combined management, his knowledge of cattle and land, her genius for numbers and organization. They added acreage, increased the herd, and became one of the most successful operations in the region. Billy grew into a fine young man, educated far beyond what was typical for ranch children thanks to Clara's patient teaching. He went to college in Austin, studied agricultural science, and returned to help modernize the ranch with new techniques and breeds. And in the spring of 1885, Clara gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, after the woman whose death had inadvertently made their family possible. The baby had Wyatt's gray eyes and Clara's dark hair, and she filled the house with the kind of joy that comes only from new life. More children followed. Another boy, Samuel, named for Clara's brother, who finally settled in Colorado and visited once a year. Then, twin girls, Emma and Grace, who kept everyone on their toes with their endless energy. And little James arrived in early 1889, quiet and serious like his father. The ranch grew along with the family. What had been 500 acres became 600, then 800. The herd tripled in size. They built a new barn, expanded the house, added modern conveniences like indoor plumbing and a telephone line. But through all the changes and growth, some things remained constant. Every evening, weather permitting, Wyatt and Clara sat on the porch watching the sunset, just as they had that first night after their wedding. Every Saturday the family went to town for supplies and to attend church. And every year on the anniversary of Rose Kincaid's death, they placed flowers on her grave and told the children about the brave woman who had come before. 6 years after their wedding, in the spring of 1889, Clara stood on that same porch and marveled at how much had changed. The house, once spare and masculine, was now filled with the cheerful chaos of family life. Toys scattered in corners, children's drawings on the walls, the constant sound of young voices and laughter. Billy, now 14, was in the north pasture helping his father with the spring branding. Rose, 4 years old, played in the yard with her dolls, her dark curls bouncing as she ran. 3-year-old Samuel toddled after her on unsteady legs, while James, nearly 2, sat on the porch steps. And the twins, just 6 months old, napped in matching cradles in the cool of the house. Clara's hand rested on her slightly rounded belly where another child grew. Number 7. She smiled at the thought. 7 children, where once she had thought she might never be a mother at all. Wyatt rode in from the pasture as the sun began its descent, Billy beside him. Both were dusty and tired, but grinning. It had been a good day's work. "Supper ready?" Wyatt called, swinging down from his horse. "Almost. Wash up first, both of you." As the family gathered around the table that evening, Clara looked at the faces surrounding her. Her husband, still handsome, despite the silver threading through his dark hair. Billy growing so tall and strong. Little Rose chattering about the butterfly she had caught and released. Samuel more interested in throwing food than eating it, the twins sleeping peacefully in their baskets nearby. This was her life now. Not what she had imagined when she answered that mail-order bride advertisement. Not what she had dared to hope for when she arrived in Redemption Valley with 29 cents and nowhere else to go. It was so much better. After the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Wyatt found Clara on the porch, as he always did. He settled into the chair beside her, reaching for her hand. "Thinking?" he asked. "Remembering," she corrected. "That first day I arrived. How afraid I was. How certain I was that I'd made a terrible mistake." "Best mistake either of us ever made," Wyatt said. "Me sending for you, you coming despite everything. We've built something good here, haven't we?" "We have. Better than I ever dreamed possible." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge. In the distance, a coyote howled. Closer, the cattle lowed softly. The sounds of the ranch, of home. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I had accepted you that first day?" Wyatt asked. "If we'd married right away, like the original plan?" Clara considered this. "I don't think it would have worked. We needed time to build trust first, to become friends before we became anything else. If we'd rushed into marriage, we would have been strangers trying to live together. This way, we knew each other first." "Wise as always," Wyatt said, bringing her hand to his lips. "Not wise. Just experienced in what doesn't work. Well, this works. You and me and all these children. This life we've built, it works better than I ever imagined possible." A cry came from inside the house, one of the twins, waking hungry. Clara started to rise, but Wyatt gently pushed her back down. "I'll get her. You rest." She watched him go inside, this man who had been afraid to love again, but had found the courage anyway. This man who had rejected her and then fought to keep her. This man who was father to their children and partner in all things. A moment later he returned with baby Emma in his arms, the child already quieting at her father's touch. Wyatt settled back into his chair, cradling his daughter with the ease of long practice. 6 children, he marveled. "Sometimes I can't believe it. After Billy, I thought that was it. One child was all I'd get. And now look." "Are you complaining?" "Not for 1 second. Though I might need to add another room onto the house soon." They laughed quietly, mindful of the sleeping children. And sitting there in the darkness, with their baby daughter between them and the vast Texas sky above, Clara felt a peace so profound it was almost frightening. She had learned over the years that happiness was fragile, that it could be taken away in an instant by fever or accident or simple bad luck. She had learned not to take any of it for granted, not one moment of this precious life. But she had also learned that fear of loss was no reason to hold back from love, that the risk was always worth it, that building something beautiful with another person, even knowing it might not last forever, was the only thing that made life worth living. "I love you," she said to Wyatt, simple words that held a universe of meaning. "I love you too," he replied, equally simple, equally profound. And there, on the porch of Kincaid Ranch, as they had done countless evenings before and would do countless evenings after, they sat together in the darkness, their family sleeping safely inside, and watched the stars wheel overhead in their eternal dance. Clara thought back to the woman she had been, arriving in Redemption Valley with nothing but 29 cents and the weight of failure. That woman had been afraid, broken, certain that she was damaged beyond repair. But that woman had been wrong. She hadn't been broken, just bent, just wounded. And wounds, given time and care and the right circumstances, could heal. She had healed here, in this place, with these people. And in healing, she had helped heal others. Wyatt, with his guilt and grief. Billy, with his desperate need for a mother. Even herself, proving that she was capable of love and worthy of being loved in return. The ranch that spread out around them in the darkness represented more than land or cattle or wealth. It represented second chances. It represented the truth that it was never too late to start again, to build something new from the ruins of what came before. It represented redemption. And that, Clara thought as sleep finally began to claim her, was the most precious thing of all. The last thing she heard before drifting off was Wyatt's voice, soft and full of wonder. "Thank you for staying." And her own reply, equally soft but absolutely certain. "Thank you for asking." In the years to come, Redemption Valley would change. The railroad would arrive, bringing prosperity and growth. The frontier would slowly become civilized, the wild edges tamed. New families would come, and some old ones would leave, but Kincaid Ranch would endure. It would pass from Wyatt and Clara to Billy and his children, and from them to the next generation. The land would be worked and loved and passed down, each generation adding their own chapter to the story, and always, in the family lore, there would be the tale of how it all began, of a woman who arrived with nothing and gave them everything, of a man who thought he was done with love but found it anyway, of two broken people who built something whole together. The story of Clara and Wyatt Kincaid would be told and retold, growing perhaps a bit more romantic with each telling, but always keeping the essential truth at its core, that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unlikely beginnings. That courage means trying again even after you've failed. That family is what you build, not just what you're born into. And that redemption, when it comes, often arrives in the most unexpected ways. For Clara, it had arrived in the form of a rejected mail-order bride arrangement that became the foundation of everything she held dear. For Wyatt, it had arrived in the form of a woman he tried to send away but couldn't bear to lose. For both of them, it had arrived in the simple act of choosing to trust again, to love again, to believe that maybe, just maybe, their story wasn't over yet. It was just beginning.